Good day, Crime Talk aficionados. If you haven't been watching live, John Pryor and Chad Daybell, well, they've mounted a pretty hefty defense. Guess where they found those two Kansas moms that went missing? What would Crime Talk be without a little crime taking place at a fast food restaurant? A Southern charm star gets arrested. You have to give it to these robbers. They are bold. Frankly, I admire that. Happy birthday. Now, let me chop you up into little pieces. And then finally, our dumb criminal of the day. Let's talk about it.
All right, lawyer.
Good day, everyone. My name is Scott Reich, and this is Crime Talk. Thanks for joining us. You know the drill. Subscribe if you haven't, like if you do, leave me a comment, hit that little bell, and remember, you can check us out on any of your favorite podcasting apps as well. Before we get to today's docket, quick reminder, the Karen Reed trial is still going on. They ended for the day. We are bringing it all to you live. If they're in court, we are there as well. Also, the Chad Daybell case is going on. We're bringing you daily coverage from beginning to end. And if you've missed anything, you can always check it out. Any of the previous 28 days of trial, we have them all here on Crime Talk. All right, let's go ahead and open the record for May 22nd, 2024. And first on the docket, well, it's the Chad Daybell trial. Now, his attorney, John Pryor, is going solo against the four prosecutors in this particular case. They're actually mounting a decent defense. Now, I don't know if it's going to make a big difference in the end, but I assure you what it does show you is John Pryor is being effective. If you may recall, Lori Vallow's attorneys did nothing. They were terrible, all right? Ineffective written all over it. John Pryor at least is calling witnesses. He's interviewed. He's hired experts. He's doing a decent job, I must say. So the defense is actually in their third day of presenting evidence, and their first witness today was a guy by the name of Patrick Eller. Now, he is CEO of Metadata Forensic, which is a digital forensic examination firm. And Metadata Forensics is a consulting and training firm that does digital forensics on devices. They provide expert testimony, and they also train law enforcement. Now, Mr. Eller had been a police officer. He had also served in the Army and was in the Command Digital Forensic Examiner in the Army at the Army Criminal Investigation Division. The last 7 years that he was in the Army, he helped build out the digital forensic program at Quantico, which is, I doubt he was there training the Marines, but he could have been, or more than likely he was training the FBI, which has their training center there at the Quantico headquarters. Well, I guess it's training center, not headquarters, but you know what I'm saying. Anyway, Eller's company does about 25 to 30 classes a year for legal entities and law enforcement agencies, and he compares the amount of data that people use kind of like an iceberg. There's 10% of what you see above the water in any particular day, but his company focuses on that other 90% of the data below the surface. You know, the stuff that I tell you, if you people all knew exactly what was being collected on you, you would be absolutely terrified, and you wouldn't go anywhere without your phone being in a Faraday bag. I'm telling you, it is crazy. So anyway, that's what this guy does. And Mr. Eller testified that the best source of evidence as it relates to cell phone data is getting it from the actual device itself. He calls it native location data, and that's directly from the phone. You can also use information captured by the phone manufacturer or the operating system on the phone. For example, an iOS system, which is a Mac, or Google. Now, Eller reviewed in this particular case a lot of data, and a lot of it came from Google, Apple, as well as some other sources. And Mr. Eller was asked by Mr. Pryor if he reviewed geofencing evidence in this particular case. Now, Mr. Eller said he in fact did. And Pryor asked, well, what is geofencing evidence? It is not something that Google intended to be used in this particular manner, but geofencing allows for you to take a location, put a radius around it, and submit a search warrant in order to gain information about various devices that would have passed through that geofence. Now, he showed a chart, which is information returned by Google for the geofence warrant based on the location of Chad Daybell's phone on September 23rd. This example was a non-filtered radius version, and there are several lines highlighted in the yellow and other lines highlighted in green. The yellow lines are Alex Cox's phone device on the Daybell property. The green lines are device IDs submitted to Google for subscriber information. Eller then describes this chart should be the complete list of records provided by Google at that time. He explains that there were at least 10 devices that were not included in the Google data request. Eller testified that as an expert, he was able to sit in and listen to the testimony of the Rexburg detective, David Stubbs, as well as the FBI agent, Nicholas Balance. So Pryor then asked Eller to talk about the testimony in relation to Alex Cox's phone. Eller says in listening to the testimony about the geofence, the way it was done, and what was returned in the search warrant from Google, he found that there were more devices than there were actually requested to be identified. So on the screen, Pryor then shows various search warrants that Stubbs submitted to Google to provide information about individual device identifiers. Eller then goes on and says, when you submit a geofence to Google, they provide a list of numbers associated with the geofence. You then need to submit another warrant to get information about the numbers. Stubbs submitted a warrant to Google for information on 11 IDs, telephone identifications. Eller says it appears that the Rexburg police were trying to find information on devices that would have been in multiple places. And then John Pryor showed documents that listed the device IDs with times and dates when the device IDs were seen inside the radius of that particular geofence. The latitude and longitude is also on the list and the source of the data, which is Wi-Fi or GPS or cell phone tower. So Eller says that the data was being collected for devices at the Daybell residence. There was a lot of other devices that are more records than what you see here, he points out. Pryor says there were several IDs of phones within the proximity of the Daybell property. Eller testified that the list included the devices the police were asking to be identified. And then Pryor went on and asked him, he says, what's the process for obtaining IDs other than turning off location devices on a phone? And Eller says if you were to connect to Wi-Fi from a device, you would generate a record with Google, right? That's what I talked to you about. As you walk by a street, and even if the phone tells you, hey, you could connect to this Wi-Fi, it's all being recorded. So anyway, the list of devices information from Google was returned in a separate spreadsheet format and organized by time and date. So then Pryor asked Eller if there was any information to suggest that Chad Daybell's device was part of the location data on September 9th of 2019. Eller says the results of the Google search showed the only device they were able to put at the residence during that time period was Alex Cox's phone. There was no location data showing a device belonging to Chad Daybell was on his property on September 9th from 9:19 a.m. through 12:10 p.m., Mr. Eller testified. And Eller says it can be difficult to disable all the data Google collects on a device unless you simply turn the device off. Mr. Eller identified 19 devices from the Google records that would have been within 250 meters from a spot in the backyard of the Chad Daybell home. Eller does not know the phone numbers of the 19 devices, and Stubbs pursued further information on 12 of the devices. And Eller went on to explain that Stubbs testified Google told him it was too many devices and to remove some devices from the list. So therefore, only 10 devices were ultimately looked at. Now, the information requested from Google started at 9 a.m., and Pryor asked if it would be helpful to have requested records from earlier in the day. Eller said yes, it could have been of assistance in the investigation. And then Pryor stressed again, there were no devices associated with Chad Daybell, his client, on the property that morning. Correct? Yes, reaffirmed. Anyway, the chart shows information returned by Google for the geofence warrant based on the location at the Daybell on the 23rd. This is a non-filtered radius version, and there were several lines highlighted in yellow and other colors. The yellow lines are Alex Cox's device on the Daybell property. The green lines are devices, IDs submitted to Google for subscriber information. Eller says, once again, this chart should be the complete list of records provided by Google at that particular time. And he explained there were 10 devices that were not included in that Google data request. Now, Eller says there were some 16 devices at or near the Daybell property on September 23rd, not associated with Alex Cox. And Alex's device made it 17 devices. 4 devices were left once you exclude devices outside a 30-foot radius. Eller says police did not obtain information on those 4 devices. Now, once again, Pryor reminded the jury that there were no devices associated with Chad Daybell on the property on September 9th or September 23rd. Eller confirmed that's correct. Eller says he reviewed at least 10 terabytes of data. And so basically, to give an example of how much that is, if you were to take the Library of Congress, it would all be printed out in just 1 terabyte, okay? That's the amount of data that is collected these days, ladies and gentlemen. That is the amount of stuff that you're dealing with in these criminal cases these days, because they always collect the cell phone data. And that's why you have to have an expert to go through this that knows what the heck they're looking for, and they have programs that can narrow stuff down. Attorneys can't do this all on their own. Anyway, Eller reviewed data associated with the chad.daybell@gmail account. Now, Pryor showed a document on the screen showing September 6, 2019, and it shows data returned from Google from the Homer J. Maximus @gmail account, which is Alex Cox's email. So on September 6th of 2019, a location point for that account was at or near Chad's house at 12:42 p.m., 12:44 p.m., 12:51 p.m., 12:53 p.m., and 12:55 p.m. There was no information suggesting that Chad was at the residence on September 6th. And then on September 9th, there were multiple data points showing Alex Cox's device was at or near Chad's property between 9:15 a.m. and 11:45 a.m. Pryor reviews the time and location of where Alex's devices pinged on the property. He also presented a list showing activity from Sunday, September 22nd, 2019, showing Alex Cox was at or near the Daybell property about 2:30 p.m. Alex Cox's device was on the property on September 23rd from 9:55 a.m. through 10:12 a.m., and there was no evidence Eller reviewed that would place Chad Daybell at the residence on the morning of September 23rd. On September 25th of 2019, records show Alex Cox's device at or near Chad's property between 10:05 a.m. and 10:24 a.m. On October 9th, 2019, the day the paintball incident took place, Alex's devices was at the property at 4:50 p.m., 4:51 p.m., and 5:01 p.m. Now, on October 19th, the day Tammy died, there is no indication that Alex's device was within 1.4 miles of Chad's property. Now, Pryor asked about a driving test, and Eller said that the driving test done in this case showed that the coverage area in the multiple towers surrounding Chad's house. Eller was concerned there was a 5-degree difference in the cell phone tower coverage area between 2019 and 2020, and Pryor asked if the driving test is considered a scientific test. He said that the cell phone companies use it to determine signal, right? The drive test itself can't locate a device. It only shows tower coverage. There was also questions about Gladiator Forensics and if Eller looked into the availability of his company using that particular software, and he said that he has tried to, but it is only for law enforcement purposes. We run into this all the time. There's a software called Gray Key that basically cracks cell phones. It was invented after Apple refused to give the passwords for cell phones to law enforcement. So necessity being the mother of invention, they created this way to crack everyone's cell phones. And guess what? Only law enforcement or military government personnel can have access to that. So not surprising. Anyway, Mr. Eller says that you can take their data and map it using other tools, but that doesn't necessarily mean it will match because you aren't testing it with the same tool. Now, Pryor showed a document that says there were 138 text messages and 50 voice calls between September 1 of 2019 through October 31st of 2019 associated to Alex Cox's device while it was at or near the Daybell residence. And that's kind of where the defense left off. Then Mr. Woods for the prosecution got up, used a little slideshow as well, and showed that the location related to the Homer J. Maximus Google account, and Woods played a video from that exhibit, and he and Mr. Eller had a conversation about specific Wi-Fi data points from either Lori Vallow or Alex Cox's apartment. Mr. Woods asked Eller if he found any data from Alex Cox's device during the early morning hours on September 9th that went from apartment 107 to apartment 175, Alex to Lori's apartment. Eller said that's correct. Wood shows a record showing a phone call was made at 8:11 a.m. from Chad Daybell's device to Alex Cox's device on September 9th. Eller says Alex Cox's device showed up at Chad Daybell's property at 9:21 a.m. Wood clarifies that the CAST report used a 100-meter margin of error, while Eller used a 500-meter margin of error. Wood stresses that Chad called Alex at 8:11 a.m. Around an hour later, Alex showed up at Chad's house. Many of the data points for Alex Cox's device were recorded near JJ and Ty Lee's burial sites. Now, Eller said that he did spend a lot of late nights over Christmas going through the 10 terabytes of data that was turned over, and Woods was asking Mr. Eller if he reviewed a cell phone belonging to Tammy Daybell. Mr. Eller didn't recall that. Woods asked Eller if he was aware that Chad sent a text to his wife about burning limbs and shooting a raccoon. Eller says he is aware but doesn't place Chad at the property at that particular time. Wood also asked if he was aware that combining the raccoon text message and the data on the screen was how law enforcement found Tylee Ryan. Eller said, nope, wasn't aware of that. Anyway, Woods then showed a chart showing Chad's device call Alex's device at 9:25 a.m. on September 23rd. And then we have Alex's device first showed up at Chad's house at 9:55 a.m. in the morning. Then showed different devices where Alex's devices was tracked on September 23rd and also September 9th, and how on both dates the Homer J. Maximus was located close to locations where the bodies were found. Eller says, I agree. Data from Alex's device were taken to the property after he spoke to Chad. Obviously, that's going towards the prosecution theory. The defense is trying to say, hey, we weren't there. If we were going to be involved in this conspiracy, why would I be there? Prosecution is saying, well, because you used Alex Cox to do all your dirty work and you purposely weren't there. That's going to be the argument in closing. Anyway, Mr. Pryor then did some redirect about the calls between Chad and Alex at 8:11. Pryor asked if there was any data of any kind to suggest Chad's device was on the property at the same exact time as Alex on those key dates, and Mr. Eller reaffirmed, no, there was not. Now the defense, right before the noon break, was going to call their DNA expert, Dr. Greg Hempekin. Once they got through the early introductions, the noon recess was taken. So that's a pretty good rundown, ladies and gentlemen. And like I said, is it going to make a big difference at the end if they believe there's this conspiracy and Alex Cox did everything and he was working in the direction of Alex and Chad Daybell, or Lori and Chad Daybell? It probably doesn't. But what it shows to the court is that he is receiving effective assistance of counsel and less likely to be reversed on appeal if there is, in fact, a conviction. None of this was brought out in Lori Vallow's original trial. None of it. They just kind of sat there and said, yep, I swear Lori Vallow's attorneys were completely satisfied that really through no work of their own, the death penalty case was dismissed. And so therefore they just thought it was victory, and they just kind of went there and went through the motions. That one may be coming back. Anyway, next on the docket. Whatever happened to those 2 Kansas women that disappeared in Oklahoma? Well, I can now tell you. The bodies of those 2 Kansas mothers, where members of an alleged anti-government group allegedly killed them because of a custody battle, well, they were buried inside a freezer on an Oklahoma farm. Now, the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation discovered the bodies of Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly after a 2-day dig through a cow pasture that was leased by one of the suspects. Now, law enforcement found a chest freezer buried with the women's body inside, along with the personal items that didn't belong to either one. Now, the women were located. Among the items were several articles of clothing with blood stains, including 2 sweatshirts, T-shirts, cloth, knives, a black K-bar knife. What is it with K-bar knives? Well, this one was in a sheath, and then a duct tape. Anyway, the cause of death for either of the women has not been revealed, but the Oklahoma authorities previously said that they were, in fact, murdered and that it was very brutal. My guess is it involved a K-bar knife. Anyway, Ms. Butler and Kelly were last seen on March 30th as they were returning home from a trip in Oklahoma to visit Butler's children. The kids had been staying with their paternal grandmother, a woman by the name of Tiffany Adams, one of the 5 suspects arrested and charged with their murders. Now, Kelly was supervising the visit as Butler was fighting through a bitter custody battle with their father and only had visiting rights on Saturdays. Now, the burial site was located on leased land by Tad Cullum, roughly 8.5 miles away from where the police found Butler's abandoned car. Now, on April 13th, police arrested Adams, Colliam, Cole, Twombly, and Cora Twombly. They were charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of kidnapping, and 1 count of conspiracy. Now, during Cullum's arrest, a man named Paul Grice was inside the suspect's home, and FBI agents noticed the second man had a bandage on his right pinky. Grice told the agents he hurt himself working on his truck. A witness came forward on April 18th and told law enforcement that Grice asked several specific questions, including, how long would it take to process DNA evidence? How long would DNA last in dirt if it was being churned? Do you know how to get a guy and his family into Mexico? Grice told the witness he was concerned his DNA would be in the hole with the bodies because he was in Twombly's home. Another witness told the Oklahoma investigators that the suspects were part of an anti-government group and had some religious affiliations of some type. And it turns out they called themselves God's Misfits and held regular meetings at the home of the Twomblys and another couple who Adams said watched their children the day that everybody disappeared. Anyway, Grice was eventually arrested and admitted to OSBI agents that in the killing and the burial of Butler and Kelly. What can you do, ladies and gentlemen? You have God's Misfits using a K-bar, killing people, burying their bodies in a pasture, in a freezer. It sounds like something out of a made-for-TV movie, doesn't it? It does. Nope. It's real life, ladies and gentlemen. Remember, all that stuff you see on TV, it's all real. It's all real. You don't have to make any of this stuff up. This is all reality. Next, what would Crime Talk be if we didn't go a couple of days without talking about crime at a fast food restaurant? Yes, and today we're not talking about food crime where food is the weapon. No, today we're talking about a woman who fired 8 shots at a staff member at a Texas McDonald's after she became upset when she thought her hash browns were missing and a biscuit. That's right. San Antonio resident Samantha Anthony allegedly fired multiple gunshots from her car into the drive-through window where employees were working. Now, Anthony was arrested and is currently being held on a $75,000 bond. My first question is, why so low? She's been charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and a second-degree felony there in Texas. Well, this incident occurred back in December 30th of 2023 when Anthony drove to the McDonald's restaurant just south of downtown and began complaining about her order to staff. She apparently arrived right at 5 a.m. and left the restaurant, but came back about a half hour later telling the employees that she was missing items from her order. Told them she didn't receive her food, so employees checked surveillance footage and showed that Anthony was handed the order. One employee claimed that the wrappers for the meal items that were allegedly missing were in her lap. Miss Anthony became extremely disgruntled, even requesting her boyfriend to complain alongside of her. She apparently then started to try to enter the drive-through window and then started banging and yelling at the employees. And after going back and forth with the employee for about 30 minutes, she claimed she never received her order. That's when she fired 8 shots. Because that's completely reasonable, isn't it, ladies and gentlemen? You know, can I please speak to the manager? Ma'am, you got your order. You ate it. And it looks like Miss Anthony ate it. I know, I shouldn't say that. That's terrible. But maybe she doesn't recall eating it. Anyway, who does that, ladies and gentlemen? She's got to go to prison. You can't go around shooting up McDonald's over your hash browns that you ate. All right, we talked about this a little bit last night. It's a completely mindless show called Southern Charm. And one of the original cast members was a woman by the name of Catherine Dennis. Well, she got arrested Monday night for DUI. That's right, driving under the influence. And you have to love the names of these police departments. This one's called the Goose Creek Police, and they arrested Miss Dennis. Now, Miss Dennis was one of several cars involved in a 3-car accident at a busy intersection. And when officers arrived at the scene, they noticed that Miss Dennis appeared to be impaired, presenting with an odor of alcohol coming from her person, and she had some bloodshot, watery eyes. Police then asked her to conduct some field sobriety tests, and that produced enough evidence to suggest that Ms. Dennis was operating a motor vehicle while impaired. Dennis claimed that she had not had any alcohol, However, when she was at the detention center being interviewed, she said, well, I had something to drink, but that was way earlier. Anyway, Miss Dennis refused the breathalyzer test at the detention center. She was taken to the Monk's Corner Trident emergency room and then to jail clearance, where she once again admitted to the doctor that she had partaken of a few adult beverages earlier in the evening. And in fact, apparently it must have been enough adult beverages that Ms. Dennis could not recall the collision happening at all. Well, Ms. Dennis's bond is set at $1,456. She has to be in court on June 1st. And in addition to that DUI charge, she is charged with, get this, transportation of alcohol in a motor vehicle with a broken seal. I think everywhere else in the world just calls that open container. Next, I like these guys' boldness. Okay? Everybody knows the Hermes Birkin bag, big deal. You know, not that I do it, but, you know, the lovely Miss Kristen, she likes Hermes, she likes Chanel, but the Birkin bags are all the rage these days. Anyway, take a look at this video. These mass burglars have torn through a high-end hotel, stealing at least $1.8 million worth of designer handbags. Now, this security footage from the Mason Wrist Aficionado shop is at the Setai Hotel on Miami Beach, and it shows the thieves breaking in back in March of this year. First, they pulled up outside in a work van, broke the locks on the door, grabbed 2 green plastic garbage bins, and then they went inside. And then you can see they're going through and taking everything they can, including 60 Hermes Birkin handbags worth $20,000 to $35,000, and throwing them all in the bin. When the store was completely ransacked in just a few minutes, they fled into another car and got into a Hyundai Santa Fe. Obviously, the police were called about 3 a.m. and arrived to find the store cleaned out. The thieves were long gone, but the detective said that there was an FE250 work van with a construction logo that was stolen and a Hyundai that was suspected of involvement in a separate jewelry heist. Well, cameras caught them grabbing everything in sight, including those bags, and piling them into the car. Police took just a few hours to track down the car owner that happened to belong to Eduardo Travieso Garcia, who allegedly confessed to the whole crime. He was also charged with mass burglary, grand theft of over $100,000, and unlawful use of a communication device. How dare you use that phone while you're committing a crime? Anyway, Garcia's locked up at the local jail on a $100,000 bond. The other guy hasn't quite been arrested yet. Happy birthday. Now let me dismember you and chop you up into little pieces. That's right. Take a look at this guy, Joshua Moser, quite the roommate. He is charged with homicide, abuse of a corpse, and tampering with evidence. Now, his roommate, David Hittinger, was reported missing by a friend on Monday, which was a day that should have been apparently special for him. Anyway, investigators learned that Joshua Moser had recently allowed Mr. Hittinger to move into the apartment, and when police searched that area Tuesday, they found blood and hair, plus efforts to hide the blood. Now, when the police went back Wednesday, they spotted a saw, a box cutter, and some bloody clothing. Anyway, according to the arrest affidavit, Mr. Moser admitted to police he strangled and struck Hittinger with a hammer. Moser reportedly told investigators he dismembered Mr. Hittinger, then threw away the body parts in multiple locations, including a cemetery, a quarry, as well as along the side of the road and a trail, a hiking trail. There's a trail of that. There's like a foot trail, apparently, that he was discarded on. Anyway, law enforcement's been searching for all these areas for days, raising questions among neighbors who were told there was no danger to the public. But at least everybody now knows, because Mr. Moser was taken into custody in the county jail on some unrelated matters. Anyway, the district attorney said that he couldn't tell us what was going on exactly, other than they were not complete strangers to each other. And in 2017, he had been sentenced to 3 DUIs and pled guilty to killing somebody being drunk years ago. Mr. Moser is currently behind bars and no bail. And finally, our dumb criminal of the day. This gentleman, Mr. David Jackson, was trying to hide from police. when they showed up at his door. So what did he do? He tried to hide himself in a small front-loading dryer. That's right, Mr. Jackson was being sought by police for a felony warrant, guns, drugs, that kind of stuff. Anyway, they searched the residence and they found him in the laundry room in the tiny dryer drum, wearing a purple Star Wars t-shirt. And needless to say, Mr. Jackson was pulled out and arrested. He is currently being held on a $120,000 bond. Anyway, let me just tell you this, ladies and gentlemen. If the police have a search warrant and they are going to search your house, best thing to do, obviously, surrender. But if you're not going to follow your lawyer's advice, what do? Run out the back door. Run! Run, Mr. Jackson, run! He didn't do that. The dryer, for God's sakes, he was lucky he could have even got out. All right. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the show today. It was kind of long, but we had a lot of information to bring to you. Remember, check out all those trials. I will be with you Friday. I have to travel tomorrow, going to the great state of Vermont for a wedding. If any of you just happen to be in the area, let me know. Anyway, have a wonderful day. We'll see you next time on Crime Talk. And yes, never forget, the Constitution matters.